This episode goes out to our patron, Pre-Dawn. They say you're always darkest, but you brighten up our day. Hi there, Garrett Robinson here. Welcome to the 7th episode of the Nightblade Epic Podcast Season 4. Hey listener, we're 2.5 weeks away from the release of Life Mage Dawning, the latest book of Underrealm. You can pre-order your copy right now at underrealm.net/rc. So last week I promised to tell you about the third main character of Life Mage Dawning, so I'm going to do that. But this time, we're getting into slight spoiler territory for the first 3 seasons of this show, and the first 7 chapters of Life Mage Dawning. This is an exclusive spoiler I haven't shared anywhere else. Now, for me, I'm not a big believer in the idea that spoilers ruin a story. I specifically try to write my books so that they're good, even if you know what happens. That way you can reread them as many times as you want and still enjoy them. But I know some people want to remain completely spoiler-free, and that's no problem. So here's your spoiler warning for the first 3 seasons of the Nightblade Epic Podcast, as well as the first 7 chapters of Life Mage Dawning. If you want to avoid spoilers, go to 2 minutes and 30 seconds in this podcast episode. Alright, here we go. The third character of Life Mage Dawning is a woman named Sylvan. She's a powerful fighter and quickly becomes deeply entangled with Oris and her destiny. But Sylvan is hiding a secret. She's a mystic. And not just any mystic. She's one of the lead protégés of Jordell of the family Adair. She's pursuing the same goal as Jordell before his fall. And she succeeded. That's right, if you're one of the ones who was upset at Jordell's fall at the end of the 3rd season of the show, take some small comfort in this. His mission was a success, though he didn't know it. Sylvan carried out her master's wishes and found the Life Mage. To find out more, you're going to have to read Life Mage Dawning. We're only 2.5 weeks away from the release. And pre-orders are more important than ever, so buy your copy today at underrealm.net/rc. That's underrealm.net/rc. Okay, now it's time for today's episode. Today, you're getting chapters 9 and 10 of Shadeborn, the 4th book in the Nightblade Epic. When we left off, Lauren and her friends had decided to ride east and warn the 9 kingdoms about the Shades. Enjoy! Shadeborn, Chapter 9. Dawn broke gray and cold, with the sun struggling to pierce the clouds and find them beneath the trees. Lauren felt a sore spot under her shoulder. After days spent in Mag's Inn, which was comfortable if plain, the forest floor was an unpleasant reminder of life on the road. "Do you think it will rain?" said Annis, who had already awoken. She was looking up at the clouds. "No," said Chet. "The air is not right, and this part of autumn rarely gives rain." "It gave us plenty in the Great Rocks," said Jem. "Mountains are different," said Lauren. "This is the birchwood." Zane still sat where Lauren had seen him last night. She realized suddenly that he had not woken any of them to stand watch. The wizard had stayed awake all night. The skin on the back of his hands was raw where he had been picking at it, and she saw him shivering as he rocked back and forth. He seemed unaware of the rest of them. The Magestone sickness must be terrible for him now. It had been weeks since last he had eaten the precious black stones, and the darkness took time to leave his body. Last time it had taken more than a month before his mind had righted itself, and his body had still been recovering its strength when she fed him stones again. Now his countenance worried her. They could ill afford such weakness, the weakness of his body or his judgment. For Lauren knew his thoughts must be as frail as his skeletal frame, and she worried what the Magestone sickness might spur him to do, especially if he imagined he was being betrayed. For Lauren had shared much with him the night before last, but she had not told him everything. Could she now? Or would that only bring about the very crisis she hoped to avoid? What would Jordell have done? Her jaw clenched with resolve. No, Jordell had seen too much value in secrecy. He had valued Lauren and trusted her, but not enough. If he had told her more about her dagger early on, she would have had less trouble on the road from Cabris. If he had told her about the mage stones, she would never have given them to Zane. And if he had warned her about the necromancer and the life mage, mayhap she could have found some way to save him from Triskin. No, she would follow in Jordell's footsteps, but not too closely. Zane must trust her with his whole heart, and that could never happen while she hid secrets from him. And what of your mage stones? That thought stopped her short. Could she tell him that she still had some of the stones? Did her desire for trust extend so far? She glanced at him again. He had wrapped his arms about himself, and one hand picked at the other elbow. No, he would go mad with hunger, she knew. She could not tell him, at least not now. This was not dishonesty, but mercy, and in the meantime, she would share all that she could. Lauren walked over to the wizard and motioned to him. Come with me a moment. I wish to discuss the road. His eyes snapped up to her, and for a moment she saw the fog of confusion in him, as if he did not recognize her. Then his sight cleared, and he levered himself to his feet with some difficulty. Lauren took his elbow as he stood, and then led him off east into the woods. Once they were out of sight of the others, she stopped. The road, eh? Said Zane. The others are no fools, that boy of yours least of all. Lauren gritted her teeth and chose not to correct him. You told me of the necromancer and the life mage, but there was something else I did not tell you, something I was unsure I should speak of, but you deserve to know it, especially now. I am done keeping secrets between us. His eyebrow arched, and she saw interest spark in his eye. Say on, then. It can hardly be darker news than I have heard already. It might be, in its own way, she said. It concerns this. She reached to her hip and drew forth her dagger. Zane fixed it with a wary eye. The black designs along its length were spiked and twisted. Unmoving now, though Lauren had seen them writhe like the tendrils of a living thing. Your dagger, he said, from whence you took the name Nightblade. This blade was my parents'. I found it when I was a young child. Zane arched an eyebrow. And you stole it from them when you left? It and other things besides, she said. Only I did not know what I carried with me, nor do most who see it, except some very few, and to them it is an object of great terror. Zane's brow furrowed, and he reached out for the dagger. Lauren hesitated, but then she handed it to him by the hilt. It is a fine weapon, elegantly made to be certain, said Zane. I do not recognize the craftsmanship. But if you had not used it against me on the King's Road, I could not see anything that makes it more fearsome than, say, a sword, especially when you will not even use it to defend yourself. To kill, you mean, said Lauren sharply. The dagger's power lies not in its steel, but in its magic. It is an ancient weapon made centuries ago, in the time of the wizard kings. His eyes darkened. That is an ancient weapon to be found in the hut of a woodsman. Ancient, yes, and mightier than can be seen with the eye. Jordell recognized it from the moment he saw it, and eventually he told me its tale. It is a weapon of the mage hunters, a blade for hunting wizards and killing them. Zane sucked in a sharp breath through his teeth, and suddenly he held the dagger gingerly between thumb and forefinger. He handed it back to her, and Lauren took it gratefully. Now the wizard looked at the blade with distrust. I have heard tales of such weapons, he said. There were dark whispers of them, and of the mage hunters that passed among the students at the academy. If our instructors heard us whispering these tales, we were sharply reprimanded and beaten. Of course, that only made the tales spread farther. I had heard that one such blade was found recently, sometime within living memory. The High King Inelin discovered it, or it was revealed to her, said Lauren, and she grew wrathful and reinforced the fearless decree because of it. To carry such a weapon means death, not only for the wielder, but mayhap for the mystics themselves. As it should, growled Zane. They use these weapons to slaughter my kind in droves. No wizard could rest easily at night, knowing such blades were carried in the Nine Lands. Who knew but that some mystic might not appear upon your doorstep the next morning, immune to your magic and intent on taking your life? They say it was a time of great fear for us, and the very reason for the dark wars of the Wizard Kings. After I heard of how they hunted us, I could find no fault with my forebears for beginning those wars. He had begun to pace as he talked, and his voice rose louder and louder in its wrath. Lauren stood back from him and found her hand gripping the handle of the dagger more tightly. But almost as soon as the anger had come upon him, it fled. He sagged like a sack of grain with the bottom sliced open and placed a hand over his eyes. "No," he muttered. "No, those are wrathful words from days I have left behind. I have eaten of the mage stones and come back, twice now. I have seen now what plagued the Wizard Kings, what madness took hold of their minds and led to the dark times." "The Wizard Kings ate of mage stones?" said Lauren. "I had not heard that." "You had not heard of mage stones at all until you left the birchwood behind you. Yes, the Wizard Kings consumed the stones with reckless hunger. Their power was all the greater, but so were their madness and their wrath. Those who abstained were no villains, at least no more so than any other kings. But as the kingdoms vied for power, wizards ate the stones in greater numbers." He looked at her, and she saw in his eyes the same man she had first met under the trees of this very forest. Bitter, yes, and quick with biting wit, but mostly sad and frightened and a little lost. "Now I have learned of their madness, and it makes me wish there were more such weapons in the Nine Lands." Lauren gulped. "What, then, do you think I should do with it?" "Keep it," he said. "I have lived my whole life as a wizard, and until recently I gave little thought to what it must be like for the rest of you, those without the gift and the curse of our power. I can only imagine the fear you must feel, living in these kingdoms where magic runs rampant. Unless I miss my guess, you will cross paths with many more wizards in the course of your life. Keep it, and use it to your advantage." He pushed past her and made for the camp, leaving Lauren standing on her own. Just before he vanished between the trees, he turned and called back over his shoulder. "I only hope I never make an enemy of you again, Nightblade." Shadeborn, Chapter 10. They set off soon afterwards, mounting their horses and heading east through the trees. Despite the cast of the sky, the day soon warmed to a nearly unbearable heat. Lauren cast her cloak back over her shoulders. Chet removed his own, stowing it in his saddlebags, and the children did the same. Only Zane still felt chilled, and clutched his cloak tighter as they went, trembling. Lauren set a good pace for them, but nothing too drastic. Though she thought they were most likely safe, she had not entirely discounted the possibility that they were still being followed. They could need their horses' strength for a sudden burst of speed. But they saw no sign of pursuit, and at midday she felt confident enough to let them stop for a meal. It was a strange feeling, she reflected, sliding down from atop midnight. For so long they had had Jordell to set their pace, and he had pushed them hard or let them wander, according to the urgency of their mission. Now they were without his guidance, and Zane, though older than Lauren, was in no condition to set their course. Lauren realized with a start that the others now looked to her for leadership. It was not an entirely comfortable feeling. "So, do you know any songs?" said Jem, lounging in the grass and looking towards Chet. "Jem," said Lauren in a warning tone. "What?" said Jem. "Albert knew songs and was happy enough to sing them. He had a fine voice, too." His eyes grew solemn, and he looked down at his nails. "I heard him sing," said Chet, "but I do not have his gift for it. There were only a few in our village who knew many songs, let alone had the voices to carry them. They guarded the secret jealously. I think they enjoyed the attention it earned them when we would have a dance." Lauren suddenly laughed out loud, and the others looked at her, startled. "I'm sorry," she said, "but do you remember when Miss Aisley grew drunk on wine and forgot the words of the song she was singing?" Chet's crooked teeth flashed in a grin. "And she had set her cap for Rickard, but she was so befuddled she seized Bracken instead and gave him a kiss so deep the old man nearly fainted." Lauren doubled over, and by now the children had caught their humor and chuckled along. She even saw Zane smirk. "Rickard would not speak to her for months, and Bracken kept hanging about her house day after day, and stayed a week longer than normal." Their deep belly laughs rang out through the forest, echoing from the trees. Lauren had almost forgotten what it was to laugh, and certainly at a memory of home. Chet fixed her with a look, and it was as though he could read her thoughts. "You see, not all our past is dark. I'm happy we will see our village again. Mayhap now that those who made it so terrible for you no longer dwell there, you will change your mind about it." Lauren thought she heard the words he did not say, "and change your mind about our journey." She frowned. She did not wish to keep arguing about this with him, least of all in front of the others. "I wish I could see Bracken again," she said, as a way of changing the subject. "When last he came, I was still just a little girl. I wonder what he would think of me now, chasing after the tales of Menet he used to spin for me." "Menet!" cried Jem. "I heard many stories of him. He was my favorite. The other boys in Cabris always said I looked just like him." "We heard of him as well upon the seat, but never as a hero," said Annis, sniffing. "He was a scoundrel, a lawbreaker whom the king could never break to justice. I heard he slew maidens in their beds and took toys from children." "Menet? Never," said Lauren. "He took from evil kings who taxed their subjects too highly, and kinslayers and murderers. Always he made right what others had done wrong." Annis looked at Jem, but the boy only shrugged. She looked to Zane, but he shook his head. "I care little for children's tales of a thief who likely never lived in the first place," said the wizard. "Everyone has heard of Menet, but the wise know he is nothing but a legend." Lauren glared daggers at him, but Chet spoke first. "Still, such tales may have worth, but I never loved them like Lauren did. I loved the stories of kings and warriors, brave knights and cunning constables who brought down those who broke the king's law." "Mayhap one day you will hunt me, then," said Lauren with a smile, "for I am no friend to constables." "Why do you think I left the village in the first place?" said Chet, feigning an evil smile and forming his hands into claws. She shoved him into the grass as the children laughed anew. It felt as though a dark storm that had followed them from northward was now blowing away. They went to their bedrolls that night in far better spirits than the day before, and Lauren insisted on standing the first watch to let Zane sleep. She did not know if he ever actually found slumber, and more than once in the night she saw his eyes glittering in the light of the fire. But she woke Chet as the moons were descending, then fell into a deep sleep that lasted until just after dawn's first light. But they were not long on the road that second day before something happened to darken their mood. The land rose sharply up across their path, forming a range of hills that were just shy of being proper mountains. But there was a clear path up, so they found its base, and then Lauren and Chet led them in the ascent. They were halfway up the rise when Lauren chanced to look out at the land they had crossed. And there, some leagues away, she caught a flash of movement that did not look like a bird or a bear. She called them to a halt and stood stock still, searching. "What is it?" Jem said from his saddle. Lauren hushed him with a sharp wave of her hand and kept staring. Chet came to her side and spoke softly. "Did you see someone?" "Mayep," she mumbled. "Somewhat south of our course, and there!" She saw it again. There were several shapes moving beneath the trees. Even from this distance, she recognized riders on horseback. "I see them," said Chet. "They are many. Mayhap a dozen." "A dozen what?" growled Zane. "Riders," said Lauren. "Some leagues behind us, but traveling in the same direction." All were silent for a long moment. Then Annis said, half-heartedly, "We do not know they are shades. They could be simple travelers like us. Surely some people must travel through the birchwood on their journeys, or because they do not like the roads, or simply because it is more pleasant than the lands beyond." "We are hardly simple travelers," said Lauren. "But mayhap you are right. We do not know that we are pursued. After the luck we have seen upon our road, do any of you truly doubt it?" said Zane darkly. "They are riding east. That means they come from the direction of Northwood." They did not answer him, but carried on up the path, and their steps came a bit quicker. This has been a production of Legacy Books, written and narrated by Garrett Robinson. The music in this podcast was created by Will Musser. Check out his incredible work at willmusser.com. That's WILLMUSSER.com. Today's letter is S. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.